Okay, hi guys, my name is Sino and I'm trying myself at coding my own game, and for the last couple of weeks I have a problem and I feel like I'm in a dead end and I just can't wrap my head around possible solutions. So maybe you can take a look and maybe you are able to help me. I would really appreciate if you follow along and just give me any advice that pops your head. So in my game we have a world view, and without going into too much detail I just want to explain the problem now and then we can go into more detail. So just to give an overview about where the problem actually is. So we can move around and there's like a 10% chance whenever that number down here comes back with less than 0.1 we get an encounter. And this is like, it's supposed to be a random encounter. So far I only have one encounter for testing purposes, so this message here will always be the same. And now we have three options. We can leave, which just closes the panel. This one is easy. We have a fight button, which will load an enemy list, an array of enemies, and we can now buy some units ourselves and go to the fighting screen, and then we can fight. So this one works fine too. Now the problem comes when I press the middle button. So I want to have encounters. I need an easy way to set up these encounters. So when I press investigate, I want a new dialogue to come, and I have two possible paths here. This is possible outcome number 2, you found a ferry, and I have 3 different buttons with 3 different options for the player to press, okay? So we can wish for some gold, which should increase our player resources, wish for some mana, which also should increase our player resources, or we could eat the ferry, and I want to have a random outcome. So if I do it again, hopefully it will pick encounter number 1, the branching. So this one is always the same. I click on investigate, it's outcome 2 again. So let me try 1 or 2 times until we see the other one, okay? Investigate. So now we have possible outcome number 1. Here the player is presented with different options, with 5 different options. There is a bandit camp and we can like run away to close the panel. We can negotiate to load another encounter, a new text in the middle with new options down here. We can go to the fight screen, we did that before, that works fine. We can try to assassinate some enemies to have a 50% chance of removing 1 or 2 enemies from the enemy array. And we can make an offer to sacrifice one of our units to get away, okay? So these are just ideas. It's not programmed yet, and that's the whole point. I don't know how to program these buttons. As you can see, if I go on runaway, it will close the panel. That is not a problem. But since I have many encounters in my head, I need a lot of buttons, and these buttons need different functions attached to it. And the way I coded it so far, I will give you a rundown, okay? I will try to not go into too much detail here. So if we click on our rider, or if we look at our map screen. So this is a map screen where we can move around, and we have our rider, the fellow dude over here, and we have our pop-up encounter message that will like pop up whenever we have an encounter. And the way it works right now is that our rider has some code, and whenever we move on our cell grid, on our hex grid, there's like a 1%, a 10% chance that this one will come up true. And if roll encounter gives us is fulfilled, is true, we will send a signal. So this is happening down here. Emit signal encounter happening, and we send the terrain type, like are we standing on grass or snow or mountain or whatever, because I want to have different encounters depending on where we stand on the world map, and the current temperature. So each cell has its own temperature that we send along the way. So this gets sent to our encounter scene. Okay, so if we open up the encounter scene, it's just like this message, or this panel. You can see the resource tree over here. So we have our encounter message and we have our 5 buttons. Now, Each of these buttons can send signal, obviously, to our encounter script on the top. And the encounter script basically says, again, I try not to get into too much detail here, but if the encounter is happening, if we get the signal from the rider that there is an encounter, first I set the current terrain to whatever terrain is sent in the signal. Then we pick the encounter, which is basically just saying, okay, are you on a grass tile? Then pick from the grass list. If you're on a desert tile, pick from the desert list. If you don't have any encounter that matches your terrain, give me a message so I know there is an encounter missing. Or else pick a random encounter from my MISC encounter tab. Okay, the MISC encounter tab is like, it can happen on all different, it's not bound to the terrain, basically. And this works. So this is nice. We can pick an encounter from these like arrays. For testing purpose, there's only like one, only this one encounter right now. So what is an encounter in my case? That is probably the most important part to understand, to help me with my problem, or to understand my problem. So I created a script encounter base resource. Okay, I can go over here. And this is nothing but like a blank encounter I can fill over the inspector. So if I look at the first encounter we had now, it's like you heard a strange sound, what do you do? So I have the, where is it? The message. So everything that defines the encounter is defined in the inspector. I can put my enemies here, like I have an enemy array packed scene. So if we want to have enemies here, I can just like put enemies into that array for the fighting screen. And I have my 5 buttons. So this is like always the same, button 1, button 2, button 3, 4, and 5. And they have a string and a pop-up message and a follow encounter. And text and pop-up message, you can ignore the pop-up message, it's not relevant right now, but I can like change the text of the button, and this works great. So if we go back to our encounter and we go down here, after we picked an encounter, we then initialize the encounter, and that is basically setting the message that is shown here, the encounter message. The next step is to change the button messages and to decide how many buttons we want to use. If we go back to our blank resource, I have a number on top of here, encounter button count. So if there's a 3, we will have 3 buttons visible. You get the idea. So my problem is, and I'm sitting there like 2 weeks now, how can I make the buttons responsive? How can I make the buttons like branch? For example, let's have a real example here. So this is the first encounter we always encounter right now. It's the only one I've set up for testing purpose. We hear a strange sound. What do you want to do? I want to show 3 buttons. The first button should be should say leave, and it should just close the encounter. And the way I approach that problem, how do I close the encounter, is that every button has a type. So I have defined 5 different behaviors for the button right now. Close the encounter, go to the fighting screen, open a pop-up, or load the next encounter. And the leave button on that scene, so if I restart the game, and we just, why didn't it work? Let me try again. Oh, what did we kill now? I think I have to make the encounter actually visible, right? Yeah, so you heard a strange sound, what do you want to do? Now we have the leave button because I set the leave text. See, and this corresponds to this on the right side. So we have the leave, and the type of that button is close encounter. That's what I told it to be in our resource, you know. We have button 1, type, global button type. And if I looking at my global script, we have like these 5 enums: empty, close encounter, fight, open pop-up, and load next encounter so far. And I choose that, okay? So when I set up a new resource, I can say, okay, the first button should be the close encounter. And now in my encounter script, if I scroll a little bit down here we have a match type, button behavior. If we press a button, this is run. So we decide what the button actually does. And the first one is close encounter, and then we just run the function hide encounter, which closes encounter, unpauses the game, and stuff like that. So by choosing the button type in this drop-down menu, I actually trigger which code should run that I define in the button behavior. So if I now click on leave, this is what runs, hide encounter, which is, as I said, we turn the visibility to false and unpause the game. Very well. If I, where is it? Button behavior down here. So if we have another match like fight, we will hide the encounter as well, and then we will go to the fight screen, which is like loading the enemies and changing which enemies to fight and stuff like that. Okay, works well as well. So where's my problem? My problem is that it gets super complicated now when I try to go one layer deeper. If I want to have the encounter investigate, okay, this is button behavior, load next encounter. So first we will hide our panel right now. Then we have encounter branching, which isn't really cool because somehow I need to know which scene, which encounter is the next resource for me to go to, you know? So if I press investigate, I want to actually load one of these. I want to have a variance there. I want to have a 50-50 chance of either loading the E1, P2 strange sounds, which is the, hey, there's a bandit camp, and I want to have a 50% chance to find this encounter, which is you found a ferry. So when pressing investigate now, I want to have a coin flip. And then I want to decide which encounter to load, and that is what's happening here. So if we press button 2, there is an array in my base resource. You can... there should be an array. Give me a second. Where is it? Yeah, here, button 2 follow-up encounter, it's called. So we have the button 2 because it's the second button we press, button 2 follow-up encounter array. And I have these two paths here to encounter part 2 and part 3, basically, okay? The bandit camp and the ferry. And that is like an array, and I want to choose one at random. That is pretty straightforward right now. But later down the road, I want to actually have like complicated stuff. Like if you have perk 1, I want there to be a 10% increased chance to have a good encounter instead of a bad encounter or stuff like that. And I don't know how to program that. How can I make this better, you know? This is like horrible, and I know it, but I don't know how to make it better. So let's say I mean, this works, right? I can investigate, and there's a 50% chance that it's either outcome 2, the ferry, or outcome 1, the bandit camp. But now what? Now I have 3 buttons again, in this case, and these buttons need new functionality. So in theory, each of these new buttons would need a new button type, right? So if I go back into the global GD, I would have to, you see there was one button to increase the gold, right? So we have one button functionality called, I don't know, increase gold. Let's just name it like that, okay? Increase gold. And if I go now to my base resource and I go to the ferry one here, you found a ferry. Now I can go to, if I save it, at least it should give me the option push for some gold. Okay, now can Yeah, I probably have to close it and open it up again. It's a little silly in that regard, sadly. So if I go back to that resource now, go on, load. If I go back to that resource now, I should be able to wish for some gold to make increase. I mistyped it, but whatever. In create gold. Okay, so this is a button type now. And now I would have to go into my encounter and I would have go button behavior. And I would have to say, yeah, here, button behavior type pop-up message. So I would have to go down and say, okay, global button type dot increase gold. I should just fix it probably. Increase. Increase. Save. Did it fix it here as well? I'm a little bit afraid I have to restart again, but I will just do it. But maybe you see the problem. So I would have to create a new button type for each new action a button has to do. And obviously I have to define it now, you know? So I have to go to global, increase gold is there, nice. And increase gold is here. And I have to type it correctly. Global button type increase gold. So if we find that, I want to something to happen, and we may player resource. Yeah, player resource. I think it's gold. I'm not entirely sure, but you know, increase by 100 or whatever. So now we would increase our gold by 100, I guess, and doesn't find it. Increase gold. Yeah, my bad. Increase gold. I'm sorry I'm a little bit hectic right now because I don't want. I just want to get a point across. So okay, now we maybe have something where we can increase the gold by 100, but maybe the next button should increase it by 200, or maybe the next button should increase it by 200 times our skill points in whatever. And there must be an easier way than to have all these different button types, because sometimes I will have a function that is very close, you know, like very, very close in functionality. Like it gets, I don't know, it's so hard to communicate where my problem is. But let's say one button, come here. So investigate. Let's say I try to assassinate some enemies. 50% chance of removing one to enemies. So now I would have to have a button type, and I would call it assassinate. And then I could assassinate, like I press it and I roll the dice, and so I have a coin flip, like 50-50, whatever. And then I kill one or two enemies, like I pop them from the enemy array, and that makes sense. But if I want to interact with that function, if I want to change the parameters, if I want to have like a perk that I actually can increase the chance, or that I can pick which enemies to erase, where do I write it? Because I can't just type it in the button type, right? Because I would have that button type assassinate, and then I would have like easy assassinate, where it's just a coin flip and random enemies. Then I would have the specific assassinate, where you have the 50-50 chance, and then you can pick the enemies by hand. And then I would have a more lucky assassinate, where the chances increase to 60% instead of 50. But all these would need a different button type. You know what I mean? I'm having the feeling that I do a very bad job at explaining all this, but maybe you get my confusion. Maybe you can understand that this is like, I don't know how to handle this. I know how to change the text, how to change the buttons, but how can I give the buttons life is basically what I try to say. What is a good approach? Should I maybe just do different buttons and just choose which button to load, or can I like send the information? Like this function, encounter branching, this is like horrible as well, right? So basically when I press on a button, each button in my resource here has like follow-up encounters. So I have an array. Each button on each encounter has an array of possible follow-up encounters. And yeah, this is so complex. I can't wrap my head around. If you have any good resource at all to help me out here, I'm so lost. I don't know how to. I'm feeling like I'm very close to getting it, but I actually don't get it. It's frustrating. It's really frustrating. How this is like a solved problem, right? This is not hard. You have encounters, you have text, you can press buttons, different stuff should happen. How? How do I give these buttons life? In a reusable way. Because here I have run away. I just want to close this encounter. And this is easy. Because I can press close, and as defined here in this resource, it's a close encounter button. So I press it and it closes. But it gets so complicated with all the different possibilities of what an encounter could play out like. So I need a single function for every possibility. This seems like a very bad approach. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can help me. Maybe I'm not making sense to you. The fuck? If you have any idea, it's very hard for me to articulate the actual problem, but maybe you understand it. I don't know. I appreciate every help, any little bit of advice or links to YouTube videos or whatever, resources for me to learn on how to handle that, because it doesn't seem that complicated, but I just can't do it right now, and it hinders me in proceeding with my game, and it's freaking me out. So thank you.